Good evening. My name is John Fumey. I'm the executive director here at the Akron Art Museum, and I could not be more thrilled than to be here this evening, welcoming all of you and being part of this program, specifically to celebrate the launch of this book. So I really want to say congratulations to those that I know, to Christy and to Dominic and Tanya. And again, welcome back to Akron. I'm really excited to have you here. But this is phenomenal, and I have my own copy, so which is really awesome. But anyhow, not much to say other than we love to collaborate with other organizations, and specifically with NCCAkron. I also want to give a quick shout out because I think Caitlin is sitting in the back somewhere from our team who helped orchestrate this as well, and it's just phenomenal, and it really makes a difference. And if you haven't been here before, I know you have a little break coming up between the end of this panel and the filming of the Talking Heads film. Yeah, there you go. Stop making sense. Thank you, Jenn. And really, if you get a chance, please go visit the galleries, and specifically our current exhibition called Glow, Neon and Light. You get a little splash of it in the lobby already. But if you do have the chance, run upstairs and enjoy that. It's an incredible exhibition that we just launched last Friday. So with that, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce my dear friend, Christy Bolingbroke, to lead this panel tonight. So thank you very much.
It's always more real with a microphone. Oh, thank you so much for being here. It's my pleasure to add to John's welcome. First of all, as the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography, one of two such organizations being right here in Akron, you may be asking yourself, why is the National Center for Choreography publishing a book? And I'm here to tell you that our mission is to invest in the research and development of new work in dance, to strengthen the national ecosystem, and to further advocate for dance and the creative process as an essential part of culture in this country. And while the performing arts often specializes in ephemera, if you weren't there to see it, you might never be able to see it again. Print is forever. That's what we learned throughout this process. But of course we want to do a live event to be able to celebrate. And tonight is our first prototype of such an event. Bless you. And the first before we hope to embark on an 8-city tour throughout the rest of this fiscal year. And what I also love about Akron is then when we reach out to the Akron Art Museum and say, hey, we want to come and play in your auditorium. And they say, yes, what do you need? And then we say, oh, by the way, at Akron Coffee Roasters, and you get to run into Jenn Kidd, and she's like, I've been wanting, it's not just yes, it's yes and. I've been wanting to stream Stop Making Sense. And that was when I was like, I might believe in the fates. Because, and I don't think I'm offering any spoilers, because this film came out in the 1980s, but maybe you didn't get to see it on VHS or DVD. And my experience the first time was to see it on DVD. And remember when DVDs had special features? The special feature for this film was David Byrne in drag interviewing himself. So mind-blowing when I think that that was made in the 80s, right? This was long before AI. And so one of the things, if you are familiar with the film, or maybe you don't know you're familiar with the film, is the big suit. Slowly throughout the course of the concert, his suit will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so drag David Byrne interviewed himself and said, what's the deal with the big suit? And he said something that has stuck with me since I watched that DVD. He said, I wanted to emphasize the body because sometimes the body understands things before the mind. That spoke to my dancer self like no other truth. And I was like, yes. And that's also one of the reasons that we're here. Our creative admin research program is rooted in the idea that there isn't just one way of making dances. And so there shouldn't be just one way of doing arts and dance business. But that also is, we're here to encourage the artist as expert, that our artistic training in the studio also prepares us to write those grants, to answer those emails, to make those business decisions. And so this book is a wonderful celebration, telling those stories, highlighting the work that has happened from our program over the last 4+ years, and continuing to show that work. And part of tonight's design is that we have a couple contributing authors that'll share a little bit from the book, but we also have local case studies. Because just because they weren't in the book doesn't mean they aren't doing the creative administration. And we're very excited to shine that light. There's another book I want to tell you about, also by David Byrne, called How Music Works. And one of the things, if you haven't seen it before, is he doesn't talk about how his music works. Instead, he reminds us that you may premiere something at a certain time, whether it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 25 years ago, or 5 years ago. And it's going to be received differently because the environment's changed, because technology has changed, because people have changed and evolved over time too. And it's for that reason that tonight's themes are about highlighting artists' voices that are doing this change-making work in conversation and relationship to community, to the local ecology that we're a part of, and how do you continue to evolve and adapt through it. So, with that said, I do want to offer, if you didn't already, you can scan the QR code that has all of our playbill information and our guest speakers' bios. The QR codes are on the walls as you enter and exit the auditorium. I'll be coming back throughout the night, but first up, I'm very thrilled to welcome a longtime friend and colleague, Tanya Lockyer, all the way from the Pacific Northwest as our editor for this book and a contributing author. And she is going to kick off the festivities by offering a performance lecture demonstration of her essay, Dance as a Radical Act, an artist-led, community-centered approach toward building a creative ecology. Please join me in welcoming Tanya.
Thank you so much, Christy. Thanks for making this book possible, and thank you, everyone who's here tonight. Quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you identify as an artist. Oh my God. Okay, raise your hand if you identify as an administrator. Okay, both. Oh, 2 hands, I love it. Even if you didn't raise your hand. If you did raise your hand, I want to say that, it's a 3-year process developing and editing this book, and it is by and for artists and creative administrators like you. And even if you didn't raise your hand, I think you'll still find it a treat because it's full of stories about how artists get things out in the world, ultimately, to create the kinds of ecosystems and communities we need and we want to be a part of. Of course, artists everywhere, including in this room, are finding creative ways to carve out their creative lives. It's like the only way you can, right? But this is a book about 30 dance artists. So I thought I would share a little bit from my writing in the book, but really ask the question, what do dancers bring to a conversation about administration? So we might start with how dancers think about space and spatial systems. You might think about the difference between ballet and modern dance this way. Ballet is all about the vertical. It's about leaving Earth and going into the heavens. It was founded by Louis XIV, who thought he was God on Earth. He called himself the Sun King. And just like all the roads in Versailles moved towards his palace, in classical ballet, all movements radiate from the dancer's center, from their solar plexus. But what if you're 13 and you don't want to perpetuate royalty? You might get into the modern dance, which you might think of as a circle. It was about the universal, right? The sacred circle. But what if everything that's sacred fits in the circle? What about everything that doesn't fit in the circle? And every circle has a center. And in modern dance, that's the solo genius. It's Martha Graham. It's Jose Limon. It's Bill T. Jones. So when I moved from ballet to modern dance, I thought I was going to feel really liberated. And instead, I was like, this feels more authoritarian than ballet. So that's when I moved to Manhattan because I wanted to be around the ideas of Merce Cunningham and John Cage, who said, what if there's a multiplicity of centers, which means that everyone and everything is the center. They said every movement can be dance and every sound can be music, which means that everything is sacred, or it means that nothing is sacred. And I have to say, these roads look a lot like Manhattan. And when I would move from my little apartment on Mott Street and walk to my rehearsals at the Cunningham Studios, I had a hard time reconciling what I was seeing on the street, like a 6-year-old boy growing up in the subway, and the kind of values we were embodying in the studio. We took this kind of cool horizontal reaction to a horizontal world. But of course, there's other ways of responding to the circle, right? Cultures all over the world dance in circles. I bet most arts organizations start in a circle, people sitting around a table. And my husband was invited to this ceremony in the desert where a tribe for millennia has come together to dance in a circle. Hundreds of people moving together in a circle in the desert. And I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in the desert in this circle with hundreds of people. And what do you see? What do you see when you imagine yourself in that circle? And now, feel free to open your eyes. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but what I imagine is that I was looking into my community, I was looking into the circle. And my husband said, no, they were looking outward. Hundreds of people in the desert looking out towards the horizon. A change in space can completely change your point of view. In my 30s, I started to look more outward. I started to collaborate with artists in other parts of the world and other disciplines like theater and architecture. And what I found is, because we didn't speak the same language, we often would use improvisation. And when you start to create something in real time with other people, you start to realize, wow, all these people and ideas, they intersect in so many different ways. And it's not that there's no centers of power, it's that the centers of power keep shifting. Who has the power keeps shifting. It's a dynamic system, kind of like the internet. And something I think that's really cool is in the 90s when cyberspace started to take over, dancers who were trained before to move from a single center started to move like this, from moving, shifting centers, this kind of dynamic system. And I started to create work out in public spaces. One of them, I would take over city blocks, and I'd invite about 30 artists to create actions. Like they could be, 30 seconds to 3 minutes. And the idea wasn't to plop art into life. The idea was, could we make something so subtle that it illuminated everyday life around it? And I remember one night, this elderly gentleman pulled my elbow and he said, "The street is dreaming. The street is dreaming." And I was like, wow, it's so transformational and healing, this dreaming in public space. I tell you all that just to say that when during the Great Recession, I was asked to take over a deeply troubled arts organization that was in deep debt and was about to close, all I could rely on was what I knew as an artist, which is this idea of transformational space and this idea of collaboration. When I was asked to be the ED of Velocity Dance Center, the first week they said to me, the board, "Would you like it to close quickly or slowly?" And I want to say there's nothing wrong with closing. Sometimes that is the right decision. It's the right hard decision. But I knew that our community really needed velocity. I knew I as an artist really needed velocity. So, and then one day I had this eureka. We're so worried about losing our space. It's like, arts organizations aren't a building. It's the people who activate them. This is a spatial system, and it's so beyond the architecture of this building. It's out into public space. It's in virtual space. So I started focusing on people and all the different portals into participating in our programs. And I started to present dance all over our city. The Seattle Times said, like a confetti bomb. And the cool thing is, within a year, our debt was gone. We grew audiences by 400%, participation in our programs by over 800%. In a couple of years, word caught on, and we became this national nexus, drawing artists to our community from around the country. And then we started to launch Seattle artists onto the national stage. And another big part of that is the choreography. It was like, we focused on the choreography, not just the choreography of artists through our programs, but I don't know about you as artists here in Akron, but I'll tell you in Seattle, the choreography of how to be an artist in Seattle was a very short ladder towards a very narrow idea of success. Self-produce, 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 self-produce. Maybe every 3 years the local theater would present you, and that was like, good luck. And I thought, to really have a career, it takes sustained investment. So what if we focused instead on the choreography that artists and audiences took between all of our organizations? And I was lucky because I was an artist in town, I knew people. So what if the system instead became, you work on your show, and then you have to try it out at this other theater, and then, it didn't go so well, you work on it again, and then you try it out here, and you have constant development, and you're building relationships, and suddenly you have momentum, and when it's time to launch, you want to go out onto the national stage, we would bring some care to that part of it. And then we'd also bring a lot more care to, how do you enter this system? Make it not something you just have to know somebody who knows somebody, and actually build programs. And that's how we created a thriving scene, by focusing on the choreography and the relationships between the parts. And I think that's why when Velocity during COVID-19 did lose its space, it actually survived. Now this was 2 years after I'd left, but I think it's because suddenly they were like, well, we have all these partnerships, and for a decade now we've been presenting events and festivals all over the city. But I want to end with an interesting kind of story. So an artist, that doesn't mean that they thrived just because they survived, right? And there was this story in the Seattle Times, and the headline was, what happened to the Seattle dance scene? And the journalist said something that really informed how I thought about this book. She said, I don't understand why it's not thriving. All the elements there, we've got like spaces and classes and artists and funders. And I thought, oh, right, that's the misconception, that thriving scenes are elements. We invest in these elements when it's really about the relationships. I don't know if you've heard this analogy. You can have 11 guys with, I shouldn't say guys, 11 people with a ball on one field and 11 people on another field with a ball, and one's playing soccer and one's playing football. Well, what's the difference? It's the rules of engagement. It's the values guiding how things are set in motion. It's the choreography. So I'm going to end reading a very short excerpt from my introduction to the book. Okay, I can see this is sort of awkward. Okay. What does dance bring to a conversation about creative administration? Well, to start, dance artists have an embodied understanding of dynamic systems. The human body is a magnificent example of a dynamic system. Dances are dynamic systems, happening in the exchange between people, ideas, and perceptions, each new creative process and context generating new results. I think you'll find more than a few authors in this book have exceptional systems thinking skills. Many of the authors bring to creative administration a propensity for investigating underlying ideas and relationships instead of just patching up problems without questioning the systems that gave rise to them. In recent years, in part due to the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, the term emergent strategies has become popular in arts and social nonprofit circles. But dancers understand emergence in our bones, how simple actions can activate complex patterns of interconnection, how a small change in a system can create a chain of events with a large impact down the line. In dance, creative research is often emergent, discovering the way on the way, navigating by trial and error, assessing and adjusting as you go. So creative administration can be approached in a way similar to choreographing a dance, by looking beyond the individual elements to the flows of relationships between them. For example, if an arts worker aims to foster a city's creative ecology, they may begin by first noting the elements present, like artists, presenters, funding sources, and then imagining how artists at different stages in their lives might move through a choreography of these elements. Are there ways to optimize points of interconnection? What paths will foster artists' career longevity? A linear path towards a single idea of success, or a path of intersecting spirals, an iterative system where artists can cycle back, redirect, reinvigorate, building momentum. Dance artists often respond to systems, including communities and cultures, as lived, unfolding experiences, continuously changing, multiple, and malleable. Malleable, we can shape the future. And I have to say, at the beginning of this process, when I had to reach out to artists and say, will you write an essay about creative administration? I would say the main motivation was, yeah, I want to help spark conversation, and I want us to know that things can change. I want people to know, let's make change. So it's really exciting to me today that that's what we're doing. We're creating the conversation, and we're going to hear from Akron changemakers. So to continue the conversation, thank you so much. Christy Bolingbroke, Executive Artistic Director of NCCAkron, and with her, Jenn, Executive Director of the Nightlight Cinema. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikisha. And thank you, Tanya. Big round of applause. So, Jenn, because of your generosity in welcoming the opportunity that we could do something together again here, and then I was like, I want to know more, like, how do you do what you do? And thought we would start with, because you're still a relatively new executive director.
Yeah.
So give us a little bit of what did you walk into at the Nightlight?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I came on board, my start date was June 6, 2021. The Nightlight had been closed for 15 months at that time. So I came on board and I was like, I'm ready, let's just reopen, here we are. I went feral for like a year during COVID because I wasn't really working. I was just making art, which was, very healing during that. But it was a really long interview process. I do not have an executive director background. I don't have a degree. What I have is 20 plus years of people and community experience and arts and organizational skills. So I came on board, and because it was COVID, I opened at 25% capacity, requiring masks. We eventually got to proof of vaccine. We built our way back up to 50%. I stuck by my guns. I was like, we're keeping people safe, right? We're in a small room together, really close, just that. But the Nightlight has always been my favorite place in Akron. During COVID, all I wanted to do, I was watching movies on my TV, so I bought a bigger TV. I was like, well, I wish I was in the recliner at the Nightlight. Like, it's all I wanted to do. And it's such a beloved institution, founded by incredible people. Actually, one of the founders is here. But also, Akron Film and Pixel, how it started from the University of Akron, was hosted in this room. So the Nightlight started here, started at the museum, started at the university, and I just felt really honored to be able to take on the helm,
And 3 years later, what would be your status update?
Well, it's been an exciting 3 years. I want to say that we've had no turnover in almost 3 years. My staff is incredible. Everything that happens is thanks to them. We raised $1 million to build a second screen. Thanks.
Humble brag.
I also don't have a development background. But here's the thing, listen, I love the Nightlight and I love Akron, and I know we deserve nice things, we deserve fun things. Events are more fun when you have your friends, which is why I love collaborating. And I want there to be arts in Akron 20 years from now. That way these kids, thank you, we host education, we host, students come through the theater. So we talk about like arts nonprofits and how you can be creative and have a creative life. And my son, who's a sculptor, I don't want him to have to move to a different city to be able to have this, right? So if I can focus on this theater in the arts district and do what I can to support whatever's around us and keep this legacy going. But I want to say, so we have 42 seats, right? The theater has 42 seats. In we just celebrated 10 years. We've had 121,000 people come to the theater. Thanks. Yeah. This year we've had 13,000 people so far. We'll have 20,000 by the end of the year. And with 2 screens, we'll be welcoming 40,000 people a year. So it's small but mighty. And we have an amazing, amazing community, amazing team. We pivoted our membership. And just one of the things I feel really strong about is how do you invite people? Mm-hmm. How do you welcome people?
The relationships.
The relationships, yeah. And that's what I bring, Do people feel welcome? Do people feel safe? Do people see others who look like them? Are they hearing stories that they relate to? Are they learning something? And that's what I think matters. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much inside of that. You're talking about the experience. You're talking about the content, what's offered on also a small but mighty screen. I'm curious, we got to hear some of Tanya's experience in dance training and how that informed her way of thinking and approaching, challenges. I'm curious what your experience as an artist, as a photographer in costume design work, how does that show up in your administrative practices?
I've always been curious, and ever since I was little, I always wanted to explore. Some people would call it nosy. I call it curious and explorative. But also, I want to see things differently. I want others to see things differently. Like during the pandemic, during lockdown, I just walked around downtown with my camera for like a year. And I wanted to I did a photo series that was like finding softness in downtown Akron, because everything was so cold and empty. Everything felt really cruel. And just finding like soft light and tenderness and like warmth in a space where it's not usually seen. And that's how I kind of try to exist, right? I love problem solving and love challenges. And that's what kind of informs it. So just seeing things through a different lens, literally.
I'm reminded in some of our prep conversations, because you talked specifically about, if you wouldn't mind reliving the role with, I believe it's your marketing person, and where you make space for their interests that also benefit the larger operation.
Yeah.
I didn't want to give it away.
Oh, no, totally. My staff is amazing. I really love managing. That's part of my background. But it's because I care about people, and that's the truth. So I wanted to find out with the staff, what are you into? What are you interested in? What do you want to learn? Like, what can we do to support you? Like, even outside of here, like, what do you want to take with you? Yeah, like, what do you want to know? So we have a team member who got certified in web accessibility. So we paid for that, got her certified in that, and they also are doing American Sign Language. So we'll have somebody on staff who does American Sign Language. But I believe in investing in people, and fostering creativity wherever we can. Right, our mission is connecting community through cinema. And it's a cinema without the community is a room with a screen. And I think when it sat empty for so long, like, I felt just honored to come back and sort of help bring it back to life. Yeah.
The just a room with the screen is a perfect segue, because I think the idea of being an institution can be kind of stodgy and fixed. I want people to come to my building, to come to my space. Right. And one of the things...
Here's this thing, we're doing it.
Right? Like, I'm here, so you must come to us.
Yes.
But you've really been going out to the community, especially in the last year, more events like this one. I saw Clueless at Akron Civic Theater. I was like, yes, Pulp Fiction's gone through. I'm curious, like, more about your thinking and the why and what you've learned by stepping outside of your physical space.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, before I came on board, the Nightlight bought outdoor screening equipment through a very generous grant, and there were programs that were happening at like Stan Hewitt, Hale Farm, these really beautiful spaces. It was a way to bring people together, safe. It was so wonderful. And when I came back on board, I'm like, well, I want to do this in Akron. Like, our zip code is 44308. We're in the heart of downtown. Like, what can we do here? I know a lot of people because I talk to everybody, but like the museum, like, I want to do this here. I think about, what can we project movies on? What can we show movies on? Like, why can't we do this thing? And that's something that I've always said is like, why not? Like, why can't we? I have a big goal that involves the blimp that I can't talk about. But like, why can't we?
But I'm sure we'll all get a solicitation to support that, as we should.
You'll all know about it for the bicentennial. But why can't we have fun things? Why can't we throw a dance party in the lobby at the art museum? Why can't we can just, these things, we deserve to have fun. There's a lot of my big thing with the Nightlight is we share stories that might not be heard otherwise, right? You can show, you know, you hear the words art house cinema. I'm sorry, it sounds a little pretentious. I'll say it. And my big thing is just welcoming people. You don't have to be an expert. We're the experts. Like, you know, we're just presenting things that you can learn something from. You can escape real life for a few hours. You can go somewhere else, like if you want to, you know, just mentally go somewhere else. But making people feel welcome. Like you don't, you know, I'm not a dance expert. I trust you to be the dance expert. You know, I just want to watch it. You know, like I can't move that way. I admire people who can, right? But really just opening the space up and making sure it's here for the long term.
And what I love is a big part of creative admin research is we talk about how do we build a bridge from 20th century practices into 21st century thinking. A 20th century question might be, how do I get more butts in seats?
Yeah.
How do I, you know, have more sellouts? And instead, you're asking in a 21st century way, how do I welcome more people?
Yeah.
And maybe that means going to where the people are.
Yeah, and that's why we have so many people coming to a 40-seat theater, you know. We show the Oscar movies before they're Oscar nominated. We show some really weird stuff. I love it. But no matter what, it sparks a conversation, right? Yeah.
Jenn, thank you so much again
Thank
for
you.
working with us tonight, for sharing your story.
Yeah.
A big round of applause for Jenn Kidd.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to welcome to the stage the founding artistic director, David Shimotakahara, for Groundworks Dance Theater. You already know everything you need to know.
Okay, I do. Okay.
It's one of my favorite B.B. Miller quotes. I was like, oh, that's right. We are the experts. Got it. Excellent. David, thank you for agreeing to talk a little bit about your experience in this arts and culture sector. First as a dancer with Ohio Ballet, and then 25 years ago, you decided to start a dance company. And it wasn't necessarily a space, so I'm really curious, why did you decide to start a dance company?
That's a good question. Yeah, just, you know, I think at that stage of my life and my career, I was really thinking as a dancer. And I was fortunate to come through a really amazing experience working with Heinz Bull for 15 years. There was a structure and a framework for working, which I really, really admired and valued as a performing artist. I think dance is such a work-intensive, such a labor-intensive pursuit and practice. For me to have sort of the consistency of having an environment that I knew I could count on, that had a certain amount of discipline and structure, it freed me to deal with all the things that you can't control, as in your body, for instance, but just allowed me to focus on the work. The idea of building that with a group of artists over time, that really stayed with me as an idea that I think as a choreographer, when starting the company, I really felt that was, might be really, really important. And then I think as the company evolved, what I realized was really having a company is not just about, the internal environment that creates and facilitates to be creative, but it's also about the external relationship that evolves over time with the community that is really, really important, and is something that we could build on. And I feel very, very grateful that we were able to work in relationship with community in this way that it really evolved, and I think evolved in this way that it wouldn't have been possible unless we had that structure of a company. The commitment over time that the artists were able to give, and the investment of the community, that cycle was, I think, rewarded. Yeah.
I'm struck to hear you describe the dance company. It was almost like, okay, great, I'm gonna also choreograph my own working community within the greater Akron community. That having this group of dancers, this group of people that you could return to. You were also doing something different. Like, having a dance company wasn't new. Dance companies had been existing, for a couple decades or more there. But in the 20th century, it was a lot of single choreographers. It was the solar, individuals, the Sun King representations. You didn't call it the David Shimotakahara Dance Company. And Groundworks does not just perform your work. You also invited in so many other choreographers. So that idea of sort of as a bridge between 20th century thinking and 21st century thinking is definitely showing up for me as we talk. I'm curious how your experience as an artist, as a dancer and a choreographer, informed your administrative practices, because you were not only founding artistic director, but also executive director.
Yeah, I really was, I think, I remember sitting with one of the first collaborators and a muse for me, my first company member, Amy Miller, sitting in the studio and trying to figure out how we were going to do education services, education programming, and just sort of like trying to get our minds around, like, okay, we know we can perform, we know, we have these skills. What is it that we can bring, outside of the theater, off the stage? What can we bring to community that's going to have any sort of meaning or impact? I've done outreach education work with other companies throughout my career, and was very kind of, it always felt very sort of blasé and not really taken seriously, and kind of really very much marginalized, both by the organizations that I was doing it with, I won't name any names, but also by the artists themselves, and it just felt sort of like this add-on thing that we did to do the thing that we were really meant to do, and it bothered me, and so really thinking about that in terms of, okay, so now you have the opportunity to change that or think differently about a different kind of relationship. And so we thought about how to design engagements, services, interactions, programming that didn't have this, let me show you kind of attitude, but really was about, having this dialogue, creating a way for the people that we were engaging with to somehow create a dialogue with them. And so thinking about that over time, like what was it that we could do as artists that would empower or inspire creativity in other people? What is it that we do that inspires their creativity in a way? And thinking about that really changed the way I think we kind of worked in community. The other thing was really thinking about our process, which was very collaborative, and I had to learn a lot about my own process starting the company. I really didn't have a process starting the company to create with.
Fewer bad habits that way.
Yeah, but you know, developing a way of working with my dancers that wasn't just about how I move, or but really trying to understand sort of how do I really harness the creative potential of everybody in this room, and then sort of transposing that to the way we were working with communities, so that we again sort of like thinking about it in a more collaborative way. That, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I mean, it kind of like, I think from the art or my artist perspective, it started to influence everything that the organization did, and how we thought about programming, how we thought about you know, just how the organization could run, could operate. It filtered into our administrative practices, just how we worked with each other. Yeah.
There's something that I'm struck by too. For anyone who hasn't started a dance company out there, there's a 20th century sensibility that still is perpetuated in some regards, that assumes that, well, if I'm gonna have a company, my education work I have to start a school, right? This is how I'm gonna make money. My earned revenue is gonna be through classes, and maybe I'll also train people. Like, this is something that ballet companies have been doing, large, institutional, conventional, long-standing companies that have celebrated 70, 90 years. And that's a 20th century notion that I just want to name, like your approach, that you were like, ooh, but how do I want to engage my community, as opposed to how do I want to earn money off of my community, is a different educational approach. So I think you're all gonna start to pick up what I'm putting down, that you're gonna name the 20th century practices and then ask better questions instead of seeking the same answers. You will all be transformed by the end of tonight. So I am curious, because we're talking about this important reciprocal relationship with community. How has Akron remained the same in the 25 years since you founded Groundworks, and how has it changed? How has the community changed?
Well, I think the spirit of Akron has not changed. When I lived here for almost 12 years, and the thing that I loved about living here was there was a kind of just, I don't know, it was just like an openness to trying things that I experienced in all of my you know, interactions with people. It was like I had this idea, and people would say, okay, you know, let's see if that can work. Or it created opportunities as we were starting that you know, I think is still in the way the community works together here. I think at the time when I started the company, there was much more of a sort of centralized kind of driver of what was happening in the community. It centered mostly around the University of Akron. Ohio Ballet was in residence at the University of Akron. There was a really strong department of dance. as a result. I think, and there was also the Dance Institute, which was the sort of community school arm of that whole institutional model, and there was something about the community at that time that was very, I want to say, cohesive, because there was this such strong centering factor. The funding, the sort of the individual donor community, and they were in some ways more aligned, I guess, and familiar with dance that way. I think it's been through a huge transition, and you know, for better or worse, I think it's a lot more disparate. It's a lot less centralized, and I think, you know, that may be in the long term also a good thing, because that creates new opportunity.
And it's not just a major, you know, sort of anchor organization, like the role the university can play in a community, but also having come here in 2016, and there was a general election that fall that some of you may remember, and I definitely had the thought, I was like, what if no one gives money to the arts ever again? Because we're living in different times that are so much also less aligned or less grounded and focused, and we're getting pulled all of our attention in many directions.
Yeah, and I think you know, there has been a really strong dynamic to kind of reimagine. Certainly, the cultural community has undertaken a huge step and evolution, and that didn't exist before. There wasn't a kind of consensus building structure.
We're a stronger sector as an arts and culture. I mean, that we're thinking of ourselves as a sector.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
David, I want to give you your flowers. You're in very rarefied peers among choreographers who've been able to imagine their own transitions on their own terms. I think that also sets you aside as a 21st century thinker. What is next? This can be a plug. This was supposed to be a softball.
Yeah, plugs. Easy.
Yeah. What is next tonight? What is
Yeah.
next tomorrow? Yeah.
Actually, I'm fortunate to be able to work on a new project in sort of like, and not feel like I'm sort of going cold turkey. With curated storefronts here in Akron, and they have been investing over the years in infrastructure to have digital media sites in downtown, and so we're undertaking a project to create new content for some of those locations. Yeah.
It's like you're filming tomorrow.
We're starting filming tomorrow. Yeah.
Friends, please give a round of applause to David Shimotakahara.
Thank you.
And we're going to change it up now, and I would like to welcome back to the stage editor and contributing author Tanya Lockyer and some of the leaders from the Center for Applied Theater and Culture. Please join us.
Three co-leaders. Aren't you curious how they make that happen? I sure am. Maybe first, though, could you each introduce yourselves, and if you have a preferred pronoun, and also your titles, because you have cool titles for who you are at Katak.
Sure. My name is Katie Beck. My pronouns are she, her, and my title is Oracle of Synthesis.
My name is Tessa Gaffney, pronouns she, her, and my title at Katak is Marketing Mage. Hi, I am Josy Jones, she, her, and I am the Strategic Partnerships Director. And you will find that my personality, that matches my personality as one of the leadership team. I'm the grumpiest of the group.
Something about strategy and grumpiness. Interesting, interesting. I actually have gotten to meet Tess. We spent some time together, and she kind of helped me fall in love with Akron. But I'm curious, can you share a little bit, like, how did you come with these titles? We got to hear a little bit about your role. How did you come up with this Oracle role and this match? What does that mean?
Well, we were talking about like how a lot of the roles that you see in organizations are just very like cold and stark, and so with us reimagining this organization, we wanted to just add a little bit more creativity. So for me, I'm operations, right? When I tell people like my title, I then put operations in parentheses, so they're like not like what are you talking about? But just that idea of like synthesis and the flow of people and creatives and trying to like foresee it as an oracle, right? Just putting some words together to make it sound a little bit more fun than numbers and spreadsheets.
Yeah, but basically, similarly, like marketing has this connotation of like an inhuman kind of, just advertising. And so coming at it from a different way of like the magic of bringing people in, like Jenn was talking about, like what we're doing. What I get to do in marketing is like tell the story of what we're doing and invite people to do it with us. So I feel like there's something magical about that. So. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to add anything else to your role? No. Well, what's very cool there is I'm hearing you're all thinking about relationships, and you're all thinking about the big picture, and you're all trying to imagine the future, have a kind of vision, which I think are all kind of leadership characteristics, really. And so you talked about reimagining this organization. Can you give some of us some context, like what is the background of Katak, and how have you reimagined it? What are the significant ways you've reimagined it? I don't know who wants to take that question, but maybe because you talked about reimagine, you want to start?
Oh, sure, yeah. So Katak started sort of as a shadow organization for the New World Performance Lab, which was led by Jairo Cuesta and Jim Sloviak. And they were sort of trained under Grotowski, which is a very well-known 20th century theater creator.
Back to the 20th.
Yeah, right. Who was from Poland, and so they came to Akron, and Jim worked at the University of Akron, and they started creating work in Akron, and so they needed a nonprofit to help support their artistic work, to apply for grants and such. So they sort of founded the organization so that they could have those grants, but then also they helped other smaller companies also start with that. Just especially in the beginning, it was more like fiscal sponsorship. It wasn't necessarily like these other administrative parts. And then when we took over, we sort of decided to reimagine it as a more collaborative organization with different companies. It wasn't necessarily like one company that was predominant, but it was several. We have 5 smaller companies under Katak, and so we really wanted to create a system, a leadership team that would support administratively in different ways, but also facilitate a space for like artistic identity as well.
That's great. Was there a moment when you were? I'm just kind of curious, like, is there a story or a moment where, like, we have to reimagine this? There's, like, a light bulb went off about how you wanted to do it differently?
So like Katie mentioned, there are 5 different resident theater companies as a part of Katak, and I have a very, like, my own personal story. So I am the founder of the Chameleon Village Theater Collective, which does site-specific work. And I had just gotten out of college, and I had been trained in a way that was very, I would say, non-traditional. And I got out and was trying to like be a part of the theater scene in Macon, Georgia, which is where I graduated. And they were doing shows like Oklahoma. I always use Oklahoma as a reference, and there's nothing wrong with doing Oklahoma, do it. But I realized that I didn't want to do it and that I didn't see myself in it, but I also could not afford to buy a building or own a space. And so I was looking around me, and it came from like a space of observation. I was observing all these artists that have all these skills or these things they want to try, but they don't have a place that is going to allow them to experiment, right? That thing they say about like entry-level jobs want you to actually have 3 years of experience, and it's like, well, where do those 3 years come from? And so I was like, I've met, one woman in particular that I had met, she was interested in special effects makeup, and I was like, I cannot help you, but you could be a part of this, and you could do it. Like, you could teach yourself as a part of this process. I'm teaching myself how to create site-specific work. And I was also observing all these spaces that were a part of the community that I was in that were unused, and I was like, I could use these. And there was this really cool, it looked like the belly of the whale that ate the guy in the Bible. I think it's Noah, maybe it's Jonah. Okay, great. I'm really far removed from Catholic school. And I was like, this could be a really cool space to make, like, reenact this, like, being in the whale of a belly. And then so I decided, like, how am I gonna do this? I'm gonna apply for grants. And then I started getting into nonprofit work. And was rejected. They were like, you wanna do what? Because it was just a sitting space. And eventually it was gonna have, like, vines and stuff over it, I assume, but it had not gotten there yet. And I was like, we could just use it. And I was coming into very traditional mindset ecosystem where I was coming at it from a different way. And then fast forward, getting into nonprofit work, I started to realize that there were lots of times where the people on the ground doing the work, if I think about it as a pyramid, there are very few people who sit at the top who make decisions for all the people that are at the bottom of the pyramid, right? How much you make, what you're doing. And I began to feel like, oh, well, you should be in conversation. It's not, I don't think that people mean to be separated from the people, but there is something about nonprofit work specifically that begins to separate you from the work. And so when we took over CATAC, I was like, yeah, like, I don't want to be another organization where that is happening. And so we, every artist that is represented by CATAC is also able to be on the board, because we can then have conversations about, oh, okay, we think we want to do this thing, but you actually have to do the work. What does that look like? And we can have that conversation together. So it's not necessarily one moment, it was just like an accumulation of like observations, and then like being like, I don't want to do it that way. And then so that's how I got here.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Tessa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was thinking about, there is like a kind of turning point for me. I feel like when I came into CATAC, I was asked to be co-leader for Q Theater, which is an LGBTQIA+ theater ensemble. And it started as a youth queer theater ensemble. And so myself and 2 other co-leaders stepped in and decided to make it more multi-generational. And this was in early 2021, so we're having conversations about how we want to approach this and what it means, in this time when so many people are, discovering their queerness from being isolated over the pandemic and, really in need of community. And so we got a grant from the Night Arts Challenge to do this Pride 365 event where we were doing monthly events, and then we brought together an ensemble to devise a piece about queer joy. And through the process of that, through hosting these monthly events, like, we really learned what it actually takes to create an inclusive space, and how intentional you need to be about that, and how you are, again, like with marketing, like reaching out to people and having conversations, and not coming at it from, a top-down approach of like, we are offering something to you, like this is about like, what we all create together, like the community is the point of it. So I feel like that ethos, started to butt up against some of the theater training that we had received of, like hierarchy from the director, or just when getting into crunch time and suddenly, things getting really intense. And so just through that process of learning about how, some of the practices that we've learned are not necessarily conducive for community building, and how we want that to change the way that we make art. And so we've gotten into like drama therapy training since then, and really are just coming at it from a completely different approach of like, we know that theater is a very, it can be a very therapeutic thing, and if it is not held in the proper weight of that, it can be really harmful. And so like really taking in the weight of that, and like stepping back from producing to learn how to do that better before we produce anything again. So that was really a turning point for me.
That's such a good point, that there's, in these dynamics of power, they can be really uplifting or they can be really damaging. I'm hearing that. And that your emphasis was on community building more than necessarily self-expression, which is really kind of interesting. And I'm kind of curious, so when you think about co-leadership, do you share administrative power and do you share artistic power? Are they the same? Are they different? How do you think about, what does co-leadership mean to you? How are you thinking about dynamics of power within your relationships? And if you're the three co-leaders, do you work with other people and do they have the same power as you? Like, how are you thinking about power? And maybe you're still figuring it out, and that's okay.
Yeah, we're definitely still figuring it out. So we each have our respective roles, but we're definitely flexible and fluid with that, because we all know each other pretty well. We started as friends before being in this organization together, so we sense and communicate about when there's sort of an ebb and flow in our life and when each of us needs to step up or step back. But we also have had a lot of conversations about who's doing what. And when something comes up where it's like, oh, well, when you do that, I'm not able to do what I need to do. And so we're very open and honest about that administratively. But artistically, we all have our own sense of identity. Like, we all have our own mission. And in a lot of ways, they are like interconnected. But that's what's beautiful about our structure, is that we're supporting each other administratively so that our artistic work can thrive and can be produced and facilitated in the way that we want. Rather than like, because each of us wear 1,000 hats, right? So like, rather than us each being marketing, producing, strategic plan, like all of these things, so we can help each other in that process.
Right.
And I think being strategic partnerships, what I do is I'm kind of the funnel for people to come into the organization, but each one of us has positions that we talk to each other about. So like, this organization wants to do this. Do we feel like we're able to do this? Like, capacity-wise, are we able to do this, right? And as a group, we're able to say yes and no. Like what Katie was saying, like we have built a sense of trust in each other, that like, I trust that you will tell me when you need me to be a part of your creative process, but I have no say in what it is that you want to explore. I'm just here to support you when you want to try to explore it, which is, we make decisions together administratively and we trust each other in that way, but then when we are in our creative processes, we're allowed to kind of be insular and ask for help if we need help, but say what we need to say and however we need to say it. Yeah.
Cool. That actually reminds me, just because it's connected, I work with Andy B. Parson, who choreographed David Byrne's American Utopia, and they have a cool collaborative process, because everybody can have an opinion artistically, but every person ultimately artistically gets to make the decision for their department. It sounds sort of similar, right? You might ask for few, but administratively, you're being very efficient. Instead of each of you having to do each of these things, you're actually sharing that burden. Or not burden, the opportunity. But anyway, it's very cool. Can you give an example of a decision that you made and how you made it as co-leaders? I mean, think if there's people out here who want or interested in co-leadership, are there any tools you've found or an example of a decision where you're like, okay, we figured something out that might help other people?
The first example that came to mind, and I don't know if it's anything illuminating that would help anyone else, but just, early in the beginning, right after the succession, like, we have this name and we're sort of building the branding around it. So we had a lot of conversations about like the colors that we're gonna use, and the shape of the logo, and like what it means and what it elicits for an audience. And we made that collectively. We went through so many rounds of different versions of the CATAC logo until we came to a consensus on it. And then there's kind of like an ongoing conversation about whether or not we're going to change the name, because no one knows what CATAC means. And that's something that's like kind of on a back burner. It's like a little note at the end of all of our, meeting notes is like, are we going to change the name? But allowing that to just kind of exist where we're thinking about it, but like that's not the most pressing issue right now.
And I'd say like a tip, like Katie mentioned earlier, we were friends before we took on these roles together. So I do mention in these kind of non-hierarchical structures that I know that a lot of organizations are not coming from a place of friendship. They're coming from maybe they don't know each other. This organization has been around for a long time, so people are rotating in and out. So I do acknowledge that like because we are friends, we're also able to come to conversations with trust, but then also be able to be a little bit more honest in a way, like I can show up as my grumpiest self and like they will receive that and then we can talk about it. I will say check-ins are really good. We're actually probably due for one pretty soon. Where we check in about how we feel as an organization. And in our last, or the one before that one, I was able to say like, hey, I know myself to be a gap filler. That is, I'm good at a lot of different things. And if I don't see someone doing it, I'll just do it, or I'll just do it because I think it's actually saving you time. And my team members were able to say, no, actually when you're doing that, it messes up my order of operations or my protocol. So I see that you're trying to be helpful, and I also see that you're being overwhelmed by how much you're taking on. You don't have to do that. So I will say, like, it may seem simple, but just like checking in has been quite amazing. There are normally 4 of us that are a part of CATAC. Nima Ball is his name is the Spaceman. Which basically means like facility management. And he decided he was in a place where he's like, hey, I really just kind of need to step back. We've been doing a lot of administrative kind of building things that he's in a transition in his life where he's just like, hey, I think I need to step back and let you continue to do the work that you're doing, but not have you have to wait on me in that way. And so we have been able to hold space for that and be able to be like, all right, how are we going to kind of restructure what we're doing? And then we'll check in again, right, at some point. So I do just being open in your communication has been really helpful.
So that's a kind of a succession that's happening organically. He's kind of moving out, right? And you're
Calling it a sabbatical.
Or a sabbatical. Well, that's good. I am kind of curious, are you already thinking about succession planning? Like, what if 2 of you, 3 of you wanted to leave and it was just one of you? Would it be okay for CATAC to have one leader that remains? Or is there something in your bylaws now that say there have to be co-leaders? I mean, are you thinking about succession? Is that built into your thinking?
To be honest, no, we have not been thinking about it. Like, we've just been so busy, like, capacity building, doing our work, right, like, on the ground. But we have been honest with each other where it's like, if we need to find other sources of income or opportunities, we're supportive of each other in that way. So I think we would figure it out as it comes. But so much of our work is, like, putting out fires that we haven't been able to think about, like, way ahead in the future.
No, we're strategic planning now. Don't have time for succession.
But I will, answering one of your questions, I think that I would still want the organization to continue to be a case study of being able to lead in this kind of horizontal manner, because I do think that there is something in it. It is rich, and it might not necessarily move as quickly as an organization where there is one person that is a part of it, but we've also seen so many organizations, especially nonprofits, that have executive directors that burn out because they are holding the brain of 4 people at once. And so it is a value of ours to make sure that the organization remains people-centered, and I think that in order to do that, at least for us, having not one leader but multiple leaders is important.
Beautiful. That's a nice way to end. I think one thing out of COVID, we slowed down. And I really hoped some of that slowing down would continue. the care of having a slower process. So it's interesting to hear you to name that and say, yeah, and we're fine with it, us slowing down, right? That's great. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you so much for what you do here in Akron and all of the work that you do. Really.
Thank
so
you.
applause. And now welcome to the stage, an Akron artist and performer, but also who wrote a wonderful essay, a funny, touching, amazing storyteller in the book, Dominic Moore-Dunson.
We love many things in Akron, calling ourselves the Rubber City, LeBron. And like most Northeast Ohioans, we love those Cleveland Browns. Oh, those lovable losers by the lake who have us all in our highest hopes every year, only to prove once again, glory may not be in the cards for people like us. And as strange as it may seem, the Browns is where I want to begin. Sundays in Northeast Ohio are really for two things, church and football. Even so, as a dancer, I knew something else happens on Sundays as well, the early afternoon Sunday matinee. Years ago, I was performing a presenting series with a small dance company at a small performing arts center. And we'd been working on this concert for probably 3 weeks, really physically demanding. When we performed that Sunday afternoon, it seemed like 25% of the seat were full. And to make it worse, the audience was sprinkled out out the theater, so it felt like 10%. I remember talking to a fellow male dancer after the show. Bro, why do you think folks didn't come to the show today? I mean, the tickets are reasonable, church is over, what do you think? And he looks at me with the most nonchalant face and goes, the Browns are on. And I respond, what do you mean? He's like, the Browns are playing the Steelers today, man. I mean, I had my phone on backstage looking at the score of the game. I'd rather be watching the game than here at this performance. And this was the moment I remember my curiosity on the relationship between dance and dance audiences awakened. I was so naive. Of course, people in Northeast Ohio are not showing up to a dance performance on a Sunday in September while the Browns are playing. The question is, why? I spent weeks thinking about why while watching SportsCenter, and the only conclusion I could come up with was because no one really cares that much about dance. Now, don't get me wrong, I think people enjoy dance when they see it, but dance, its artists, companies, history, culture, does not hold enough meaning to most people for them to sacrifice their time and money for such an experience. As I started my own career as a choreographer, I kept this concept in mind. I was determined to find the answer to the question, how do I get people to care about what I do? I wasn't interested in creating work no one cared about. I wanted people to engage in the process and the product. So I've been on a 6-year journey experimenting with artistic processes, marketing, and community engagement in hopes of one day finding an answer. So when I was practicing reading this, so I can practice reading in front of y'all, I was prepared with these remarks, but there's something about being in here in this space with you all today and hearing everybody on stage. I'm feeling the spirit a little bit, so I'm just about to improv real quick, okay? So, in late 80s, early 90s, forgive me, I don't know exact date, the Art Modell was the owner of the Cleveland Browns. And in the middle of the night, he took the Browns, stole them away, and took them to Baltimore. And they became the Baltimore Ravens. And we didn't have the Browns for a while. And then one fateful day in 1999, the Browns came back. I was in 4th grade, never forget it. And I was thinking, and I was reading this, I was thinking about sports, because I grew up playing soccer, I'm big into sports, and I was like, you know what's crazy about the Browns? All they do is lose, right? But there are people who have had season tickets to the Cleveland Browns for 25 years. They're there every Sunday that they can be. And I realized it's not actually because of what's going on the field, because not that many people want to go to the game and watch people lose, but it's because of the people sitting next to them. It's the other people who've been in the seats next to them for 25 years as well. So they're not going to the games just to watch the Cleveland Browns play. They're going there because that family that they've been around for 25 years, 10 Sundays out the year, they get to sit next to them, cheer on the Browns, and talk about life together. And that's the thing I've always watched in sports that's so interesting to me. that it's often not about the winners and the losers. It's about the people you're sitting next to and cheering for the team and complaining about them. But there's some connectivity there. And so the thing about what we're hearing today, you're hearing a lot about community, a lot about how operations speak to people. And the thing that keeps coming up in my head is people matter. Like that, to me, that's the 21st century thinking. At the core of it, people matter. So whether it's marketing or operations or community engagement, it's if people are at the foundation or the center of what you're doing, as opposed to the artist being at the center of what you're doing. That's how I feel like a lot of organizations, a lot of people in the 21st century are building what they're doing. So when I started really making my work, I made a show called The Black Heart Project. It was about this little black boy who was trying to figure out what it meant to be black. So he went to this downtown urban school called Booker T. Malcolm Luther Parks Academy of Absolute Blackness. And in the show, he went through all of these classes like how to dance on beat, Thuggin' 101, like all these things in order to get his black card. And when I was making the show, I decided I was gonna work with middle school, high school. My brother-in-law works at Goodyear Rubber and Tire Company, and he was the president of the black kind of affinity group. So I worked with them. So I'd go into Goodyear, do all these movement exercises with all these suits, and we have a great time. And what I realized in our process, like I wanted to build this conversation with a bunch of black people who were across all ages. So when I asked the question what it means to be black, it wasn't just my opinion, it was the opinion of a lot of us. So we did that, and then we premiered the show, and the hope was like, okay, if we do this with a lot of people, they'll show up to the show, this will be awesome. And they did, sold out 400 seats. Awesome, this was great. Now the thing, it was 400 seats that were free seats. And that makes a difference, right? Because 18 months later, we did the show again, and we were like, oh, we did 400 the first time, bet we're gonna charge this time a little bit, and we're gonna go to a bigger theater, right? So we got the Civic downtown, and it was a really, really cold February night, and we performed, and maybe 100 people showed up. But we learned something there. We were like, oh, we did all this work to cultivate these groups of people together, but we didn't do anything to keep connected to them over that 18 months. We just said, hey, wasn't this experience great? Come back and see it again, right? And this time, pay money to see it. And they're like, well, I did it for free. Why would I come now? So I kept that in mind. Fast forward, it's the pandemic, and me and my wife are sitting in the living room. George Floyd was just murdered, and we started having conversations about police. And I realized for the first time, because we were pregnant, I was gonna have to have a conversation with my black son about police. And I had no idea what to say. So I decided I was gonna start interviewing people around the country, like, what do you talk to your kids about police? How do you talk to your kids about police? And that turned into a podcast called NCCAkron, Negro, Black, and Blue. And I realized I was taking the research and development and putting it into a form that other people could kind of like follow along with me. So it felt like I was creating this audience or building this thing with people where I was getting emails from folks about their life experiences after listening to episodes. And it felt like there was really something being built here. The thing I didn't figure out with the Black Card, I felt like I was figuring out with this work. And then in June of 2022, the Jalen Walker was killed, and we decided to take that work and put it on stage into a piece called Incognito Aftermath. And we were like, well, maybe these people from the podcast will show up to the show. And that's exactly what happened. They showed up. We sold out almost sold out 4 shows. And I was like, wow, that really, really worked. That was awesome. But then the thing we quickly realized is as soon as we stopped talking about it here at home about Jalen Walker, the podcast listeners dropped. The interest in the piece dropped, and we realized we created a show that was based on a topic that ebbed and flowed. And I didn't just want to be the piece or the artist that came out when black people were killed by cops, right? So I'm saying all this because we're on this journey of creating and trying to figure out what does it mean to build a community build an audience that cares. And in the process, I realized like, oh, I'm actually trying to build a community that sticks together even if I'm not the center of it. Right, that I can make it work, and we can all come to that work and like have this experience in that work. But when we walk out the door, they stay connected together, and I can be a part of that thing, as opposed to them always being part of my thing. Because my work's going to come and go. It's going to be here or there. I'm going to make a bunch of pieces in 5 years, and I'm not going to make nothing for 3 years, right? So it can't be about like what I'm doing and when I'm doing it. But if I can help cultivate a community of people who will sit next to each other for 25 years to see things, when they're having their own gatherings, when they're doing their own things, I get to be a part of their thing as much as they get to be a part of mine. Thanks.
I love working with artists. I hope y'all feel that too. And I hope that the inspiration, it's the reminder of the why. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the community that made this evening possible. And to first acknowledge that lead support for the Creative Admin Research Program comes from the Mellon Foundation, and that does include all of the contributing authors and the editor were paid for this book, and that is not typical. I also want to acknowledge, I can see your glasses, John Miller, the University of Akron Press. Shout out in the house. Huge thank you to John and his team, because we didn't know what we were doing, and in some ways, many days, it's easier to make a dance than it is a book, because a book is forever. I also wish to acknowledge the Nightlight Cinema again, and also, how many of you already have a copy of your book? Hold it up. Yeah, hold it up high, those bright orange covers, absolutely. That is due to the generous sponsorship of Arts Now, sponsoring free copies for the first 25 people, and you got those books. Yay! Now, if you did not get your book, or maybe now you're like, oh, this is real, I'm gonna have to start a book club, I need to buy these for my colleagues, for my family, this is everyone's Christmas gift this year. You want to make sure to support local, and Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center is here tonight out in the lobby, and you want to make sure that you get your copy of the book. And if you do, I mean, we had no signings planned, but I think if you've learned anything, Tanya and I are pretty approachable, Dominic too, and we might sign if asked. I'm just saying, yes, you know people who are authors now. Additional support that makes what I do possible with NCCAkron comes from our lead support from the Knight Foundation. Also, I know that Akron's very familiar with them, as well as the Ohio Arts Council, the Akron Community Foundation, and the GAR Foundation. And I would be remiss not to give a special shout out to the NCCAkron team in place. Nikisha, Mary Claire, Sarah, Laura, Dante, your first NCCAkron event. Christy, who's not with us tonight, but here in spirit, because that's what got all of you here. So thank you so, so much for coming out and celebrating with us. I can smell the popcorn outside. I hope you do too. Grab some popcorn. I believe Totally Baked Pizza is there as well. You can check out the galleries upstairs, and I'll see you out on the dance floor for Stop Making Sense. Thank you.